Welcome to the Right Side Up podcast with your hosts Danielle Strickland and James Scholl. This season is Need to Know, everything we want to tell Christian leaders about the future of the church and how empowering women is mission critical to a flourishing future. The book Need to Know will be available October 11th, but to get us started, we have many of the 21 authors to talk about the flourishing present, the flourishing future, and all things need to know. We are glad you are here.
Welcome to the Right Side Up with Danielle Strickland and
James Scholl. I'm here this time.
And a special guest, Beth Allison Barr, the one and the only. You probably know her from her incredible book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood, which the subtitle I love the best. Beth, tell us the subtitle.
How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth.
Oh, man. That book has been helping so many people understand how they were given something as gospel that is not actually gospel. And so I'm so thankful that you wrote it, Beth. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
And we talked about this on a previous podcast, and then we have an interview in a new book that is a compilation book called Need to Know, which is basically like everything we need male pastors to know right now to basically change the future trajectory of the church. I think this is paramount to paying attention to what the church is called to be and do and how the church is called to move. And you know, this is with the help of women, of course. And so we're really excited that you're part of that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the chapter that you write in this book is around the making of biblical womanhood. So maybe just give us just a quick couple little that book, sort of how it came to be, just a quick little snippet of that, but then also like your reaction to this book.
This is like the most meta conversation.
I'm still recovering from my reaction to the reaction to the Making of Biblical Womanhood. The book was not something I ever intended to write before 2018. I've said that multiple times. I had the idea of maybe writing a church history textbook that would emphasize women more, but writing a book that actually pulled in my personal experience and also told the history of how we got to where we are with the subjugation of women was born in a conversation that I had with Caitlin Beatty after she heard a talk that I gave for the Conference on Faith and History about rethinking Paul and using medieval sermons and rethinking Paul. And from that conversation with her, I remember it took me a long time to decide to do the book. It took me a few months to actually turn in a book proposal, and then it took a few months, for the book proposal, just the contract set on my calendar for a while before I actually signed it, because I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, were you scared?
I don't know if I was scared. I just didn't know what was going to happen. I think it was more just I didn't know what was going to happen. And there was some worry because it was a personal narrative. I wasn't worried about the history aspect of it, but sharing a story moves it beyond your control. And this is something I think it's so for survivors to come forward. People ask all the time, why don't survivors tell their stories? And because when you tell your story, you lose control of that part that you told. Right. And it goes out there and people can use it in whatever sort of ways. And that's a hard thing to do, I think, especially when narratives are very personal and are born in trauma.
So this is interesting, Beth, a couple things. One, people might not know this, so everybody should know. I think I'm assuming people's familiarity with you because I'm a fan, but your PhD in medieval history.
Yes.
So you're a history professor.
Yes.
So that's one thing people should know. And then this, I guess, is, again, I was thinking about this. It's one thing to write out of your expertise, and it's a whole other thing to write out of your experience.
Exactly.
Especially when that experience is painful.
Yes.
And that's what you did. I call that braving greatly. Every survivor I know who tells their story publicly is just the strongest, most bravest person I've ever met. But the risks are real. And that's the other thing maybe people don't realize as much. And the other thing I realize is even men who are allies, like James has constantly been literally baffled by how costly it is to
Yes.
speak up for
Yes.
it. And every man I know who kind of enters into this going, well, I'll be an ally or I'll stand in solidarity with you. And I'll always be like, okay, but wait for it, wait for it,
Yeah.
because it always is way more costly than they could have ever imagined. And they are taken aback by the vitriol responses and the sheer kind of evil agenda behind, people trying to demean and diminish and then kind of re-traumatize people who brave greatly. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, that was probably what you were afraid of. You'd witnessed that. You've seen that before. Tell me a little bit about that side of things. How did you find protection? Were you surprised by the solidarity that was present? Were you more surprised by how vitriol it got, how quickly?
So part of my concern was actually the impact that it would have on my husband and my family. Because of what we had done, he had already lost his job and he was having to rebuild networks. And so the thought was, what happens if I do this again? If I bring this out here, am I going, to destroy his job path? What is it going to do to my children? But yet at the same time, we had already faced some of this internally. We had pretty much lost all of our friends that we had before simply by what happened in the church setting by us, holding our ground.
Yeah, you just refused to comply
Right.
with
That's exactly right.
misogyny and injustice.
That's
This is
exactly
also
right.
interesting to people because this is part of the vilification of those who speak up for truth. Is somehow you're the enemy, even though all you did was refuse to comply. I mean, you didn't even have an agenda against the church. You simply refused to comply with
Yes.
things that were obviously wrong.
That's exactly
And
right. And
yeah,
and you're silenced by not being able to tell your story. And that happened to us, of course, too, is that we were told we would lose all of his benefits or the severance pay that they doled out over a 6-month period if we spoke. And so we couldn't tell anyone what had happened. And so we had already been through that trauma, I think, and had come through it. We were still traumatized. But at the same time, so putting the book forward, I think I had gotten a taste of what might happen on a larger scale. Because, as I said, not really the history part of it. I wasn't so concerned about telling the history of what happened. It was adding in that personal narrative bit. And the blowback was much more than I had anticipated. However, I would say also, I guess the solidarity, but also the impact that the book had was more than I could have ever imagined. And that is really what kept me going through all of this. I think I got not just negative reviews, but very harmful reviews from conservative evangelical men. I mean, and they wouldn't leave me alone either. They just kept going back. And then, of course, I also got, I completely didn't expect this, but I got from the much more progressive New Testament scholar, the fact that they still had faith and thought the Bible was worth believing in, despite misogyny and patriarchy. I got a lot of blowback from that end, which that I did not expect at all. And so I think I had it on both sides. And it was really hard. There were moments where I almost regretted writing the book because of that intense pushback. And also it's just so strange having people be afraid to know you because of what they think about you. I mean, it's a very strange place to be. So it took a long time for me to get my head wrapped around it. But I do think that, in the midst of all of this, I was, and I still am, receiving notes all the time from women all over the place telling me about the impact of the book. And, I think most recently I heard a man put out a story on Twitter, and then he put it on Threads, he teaches seminary overseas, and he put out a story about the impact of my book and how the women at this part of the world that women are in legally much worse off than here, how they actually translated it into their own language so they could share it with their friends. And when he asked them why it meant so much to him, they said, because it tells the story of what was stolen from us and how we too are equal with men in spreading the gospel. And that just really moved me.
Yeah.
So I was like, that makes it all worth it. That I could help other women realize they could and could speak up, and that they were worth more in the eyes of God.
Yeah, I mean, that's so incredible, isn't it? And also, I think what people don't realize, and especially I think you're an insider of the largest sort of evangelical movement in America. So it's also, you're shaking sort of a foundation that's already shaking. I feel like too, like that denomination is already shaking as exposure comes and light comes, and it reveals, obviously the abuse of women throughout the ages, but also racism, also systemic injustices, also power abuses. And I mean, there's so many things that are on exposure right now for the whole church, and that denomination in America is a big one. So you're kind of shaking that, which is like when we talk about spiritual warfare and, principalities and powers, I mean, you are taking on a very large power. One of the things I'm always amazed at this, which I'm surprised that I keep getting surprised by this, but I always am like prophets are supposed to tell the truth, and specifically tell the truth to power. I think as a means by which God's grace is on offer. Like, I literally think God always is like wanting people to respond in a positive way to truth and lead people into freedom and repentance. That's the will of God. So prophets never set out to harm. They set out to offer hope and truth. And that's, I feel like the truth has its own power. What is always, I think, the sign of a prophetic word is the disproportionate reaction to it. So it's not the word that's the sign. I feel like the word is just the truth. That's just, It's inevitable. It's coming. Someone's going to write that book. Like somebody's got to say that truth. Somebody's got to step up to that invitation to brave greatly, to set people free. It's the disproportionate response to it where you're just like, what on earth? Why are you so threatened? So, even online and stuff, I see people, responding to you in such aggressive and vitriol-y, filled with seething, and you're like, what on earth? It's just a book, dude. Like, there's so many books that have been written that you've disagreed with, just disagree with a book, but it's not that.
It's history as well, right? It's like, these are some people in history, and they did stuff, and I love history and also liberation. So I love this story of women at work in the church from day one, from the very, very, very beginning. Women have been crucial in the role of the church.
Oh, you're going to love the t-shirts they're making for my next book.
Ooh.
I could see them. I just gave a hint at what they say on them, but they're fantastic.
Okay,
you can't release it here. You can't release it
Yeah,
here.
can we get it?
I'm supposed to.
Okay, that's fine. We will respect boundaries.
When are they coming out?
When are they coming out? I don't know. Whenever they start the pre-gift sort of thing for the book. My general rule in life is to let people do their jobs. So I let the marketing team do their jobs.
This is why women are so empowering, because we're so overwhelmed we can't be controlling. I mean, it literally is like, who's got time for that?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I'm just like, that looks great.
Yeah, good. Keep me posted, guys. Cheers. Yep. Yeah, that's great.
That's
But this is what's so fascinating about the making of biblical womanhood is so much of it is just this history. And I took a course on women in the church in the last 2,000 years, and my final paper was going to be all the ways that women are involved in over 2,000 years. And I was like, this is a ridiculous scope. I can't do this at all. So I was like, okay, women in church leadership in the first 3 centuries. That's a bit more nuanced. We can kind of study that. Yeah. But even then we see all of this stuff going on, and it's fascinating. But that's what's fascinating to me about, as you say, this reaction, that when you just say, well, we've always been here and women have always been doing stuff. Right. And again, if that offends you, it's not me offending you, it's you just learning a thing. And if you learning a thing that is in the world, then maybe it's time to be a bit more introspective. Wonder why you're holding on to those things.
No, I think, I remember something Kristen Dumais said to me early on with the book. And she said, the reason people, paraphrasing her, are reacting is because you moved it outside of their turf. And by me entering the fray, I suppose, as a medieval historian, I entered it with a whole set of knowledge that had been completely dismissed and hadn't, wasn't part of the usual battles over what does the word, what is it? What is Paul actually telling women in 1 Corinthians 14 or 1 Timothy 2 when he tells them to be silent and not to teach men? Most of the battles are being waged over what those words actually mean within the context of those verses. Yeah. And what I did was not set that part aside, but I took it and put it in historical context and then moved forward with history that most evangelicals just don't know. And that, I think, to me is, and I think she was right about that. I think that was a large part of it, why my book perhaps hit in a different way, because people were like, I did not know this. I did not know that women were in these types of leadership positions. I mean, all the way up through the early modern world. I just had a recent historian reach out to me who's written a chapter on 17th century women preaching. And she was like, even I didn't realize how active women were preaching during this time frame. Wow. And so this is a part of history that we have just, I don't want to say forgotten. I think it was more intentional than that. We have suppressed. It's a part of history we have suppressed. And so I think bringing this forward is challenging the narratives that the church has constructed for itself. And what the church is suddenly realizing, especially conservative evangelicals. You can think about the SBC with Al Mohler stating over and over again that for 2,000 years of history, these verses have always been interpreted in the same way to silence women in the same ways. And that is just, and I won't say a bad word, but that is just not true. That is just completely made up. Yeah. And so challenging that narrative, I think, both empowers the people.
That's 100% bullshit. That's what you meant to say.
Your husband is going to be so disappointed in you, Danielle.
No, but you know what? There are only sometimes where only certain words will do. I've had this conversation with my mother 1,000 times. And this is one of those times. It's literal bullshit. And it was created by men to suppress the role of women, which is actually, it was created by the devil. Really, because this doesn't even benefit men. Like, this is the thing that is most baffling. And what I think is one of the evidences of the demonic nature of this whole thing is it doesn't benefit men to treat women like this. It doesn't benefit the church. Like, when you think about who wins, nobody wins. And so whenever nobody wins, I'm like, Jesus was really clear. The thief has come to steal, kill, destroy. And I've come that you might have life and life to the full. So I'm like, if it kills, if it steals, if it destroys, the source of it is demonic. It's just that it's not rocket science, guys. The devil hates women, and he should, because we're going to do him in. That's it. He's done.
You know, we can take it all the way back to Genesis and the curse.
Right.
Crush the serpent, baby. Crush the serpent. Let's go.
That we will crush the head of the serpent.
Right.
So I do agree. Patriarchy doesn't benefit anyone, and the harm that it has done, and I know you see this, the harm that it has done is absolutely immeasurable. And I feel, I can't imagine, the people who are starting to come to grips with that. It's overwhelming. Some people, some people, it's just walking away, because it's just like, I can't even believe I was complicit and part of something that was so horrible that did this to so many people.
Yeah.
Other people just put on blinders and are like, this doesn't hurt me. This doesn't affect me. I'm just going to keep on. There has to be something wrong with this narrative because my life's okay. And then there are the people who realize that they have been complicit in it and decide to try to change it. And so, from my experience over the past few years, most people fit in one, move along in some ways in one of those areas. But I've been encouraged by how many people are standing up to fight this. And I'm also encouraged by the people who are walking away, who are realizing there was something really wrong with their faith.
Yeah.
My prayer is that they might then come back around.
Yeah.
But this idea, I see this is, I'm a very hopeful person. And so it seems to me it's a very natural response to realize something was so wrong and horrible and the damage that it's done, but that's not the whole story.
Right.
And maybe once you recognize this, there may be hope to see the rest of the story. And so that's always my prayer.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful prayer. And I think time does help. I think it is overwhelming, especially at the beginning when you haven't considered these things before. And then I think also just maturity. It takes a mature faith to get to those places where it's complex. It's not black and white. It's not good guys and bad guys. There's all this complexity involved in that. We have to navigate that with wisdom. So I think you model that so beautifully, your hopefulness. I think your commitment to the scriptures, to history, to telling the truth, to living, hopefully. I think all that matters. Beth, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what do you wish, in your best picture of the church and the transformation of the possibilities of the transformation of the future church, what do you wish men would do? And by men, I mean male leaders in the church. What would you just say to them?
I've had the chance to speak to many male leaders, some who are more invested in actual change than others. I think sometimes you are on a podcast and you're speaking with somebody and you're like, this is just for the podcast. There's not any depth here. There's no real desire to learn. So I would say what I wish is that men would stop defending themselves and would stop defending why they believe this and why they think it is gospel truth, and would just sit down and listen to how it impacts women, and then ask themselves, is this really of God? What am I doing that I am involved in this system? I mean, I think lately people have been putting out some of the more horrendous excerpts from Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. And they're like, this is like porn fantasies. And I'm like, yeah. And this was Christianity Today's book of the year, to hear John Piper talk about, the arousal of women working out and how, it's just...
People are so weird. Like, it's so weird. And like,
yes, I don't want to be inside John Piper's head. I just don't want to be inside his head.
Mercifully not. Yeah, there was a thing the other day, it went a bit viral that one of the pastors in America was talking about young girls wearing mini skirts and what it does. And it's just like, how are you making this someone else's problem? Like, this is just the most bizarre thing to me.
It's exactly right. I mean, it shows us how sick we are, and we don't see it. The fact that we objectify women like this at all, and we think it's appropriate, is just so,
Well, women and girls. I mean,
yes.
Let's be honest, young girls in miniskirts.
I just had to talk. My son is college age, and poor thing, he always gets so much from me. But the other, I was like, you need to pay attention to what your friends are doing too. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you need to pay attention to what they're doing. And I was talking about rape culture on campus. And I was just like, you need to be really aware of that this is around you, and that this is a real problem for the women that you are going to be around, and you need to be aware of it so you can help, realize that when people say inappropriate things to women, that you can stand in and say, hey, that's actually not a good thing to say about women. So my son, he's like, Mom, I know.
I love this. But no, I also have 3 boys and a beautiful husband. I feel like God gave me that to protect me from vilifying men in my work. No, honestly, because I have come home from work. I mean, I worked with sexually exploited women my whole life. So like, I would come home sometimes thinking, is there a good man in the world? Like and I would get to the door, and my little son Moses would come with a big smile on his face and wrap his arms around me. And I would then have to refuse the narrative that men are bad. I literally would have to refuse it. And then I would have to contend for something different for the future of my son.
Yes.
This is very personal to me, the future of men and men being good and part of the solution. So Beth, when you're talking to your college age son, I wanted to circle back. Your fear was what it would do to your kids and your husband. I wanted to circle back. How is that now? How do they feel about it? And then also, you've said, okay, men who maybe don't agree or have spent so much time defending their previous beliefs, if you would just stop defending for a sec and just listen, and then let that go where it goes. Like, just feel that, let that go where it goes. What about men? Because this is and I think the book really is prompted out of this, is I've had a lot of men over the last few years with kind of what I would see as this kind of awakening, where they're like, I'm with you, but I don't know what to do.
Yes.
Okay, we've kicked off a season called Need to Know, and the reason we've done that is it is in conjunction with Need to Know the book. Now, there is a website you're going to need to know, which is need-to-know-book.com. A lot of dashes, need-to-know-book.com. The link will be in the show notes. And this is where all the things will be. get this book into the hands of every leader that you know, because this is need to know for every Christian leader about the future of the church and how the empowerment of women are a big part of that. So go there, read this stuff, write the reviews, and spread the word and help us get this out. There's really no use. And actually, I'm a little bit tired of talking about this stuff, but it not being heard by the people that need to hear it the most. So we need help. So if you'd like to join our launch team, you can go to the website and just press launch team and join us. There's lots of perks in there, but also a great company of people who want to spread good news everywhere. The other key area that you could help us, and I'm very excited about this, is there's an ally section. Allies. Now, men come to me all the time these days and say, I am all for this. I think it's essential conversation. I think it's an essential practice, but I don't know what to do. Well, here you go, guys. Here's something that you could actually do. Be an ally. And there's an ally section. What the allies will do is use the book as a resource. So start book studies locally or on your web platforms. Highlight in whatever way you have, either in your pulpit or in your Bible study or your home group or on your podcast, a couple of authors in the book, a couple contributors, which there are 21. So there's a plethora of experts on various topics. And then just genuinely stand in solidarity that this is something that needs to change for the future of the church. So if that's you, please ally. Now, you don't have to be a guy to be an ally, but boy, that would be good. So we have a good start, but I would love there to be 500 allies. I mean, why not? And it is time, actually. Women can't just from the outside keep, shouting. I mean, we will, but we can't keep shouting. We actually need allies who will help us get this message out and embed it, get it in to the cultures and to the system. So anyway, this is what we're calling you to, but launch team, please help us, and allies. We need you. Need-to-know-book.com. Now's the time. And so the men who aren't with us in terms of we're not sure, we're putting blinders on, or this is not the issue and this is why the scripture says this, whatever. We're just saying, just listen, stop defending, just listen.
Right.
And then to the men who are with us in terms of they've listened and they get this is not the scriptures, or maybe they never even believed this was the scriptures. They've just never been proactive and don't know what to do. What would you say? What should they do? I feel like it's the same conversation you're having with your son.
Yeah.
It's not enough for you to just know there's a problem.
Right.
You're part of the solution to the problem.
That's exactly right. And I do have, thinking about the impact on my children, I'm just amazed at what God has done in both of my kids' lives. The faith of my son is stronger. He could have seen the horrible thing that a church did to his parents, and it could have driven him away. And instead, it has driven him the opposite away, where he is now, he spent this summer doing an internship with Mission Waco, which is nationally known for its Jimmy Doral, and it's nationally known for its work and poverty and the homeless. And he has developed his own critique of megachurches and the impact that, how far the church has moved from the gospel. And I just, that's even more than I could have. What I would hope for him came through. It was all through his change of heart. It wasn't us pushing it on him at all. Right. As for my daughter doesn't remember women not preaching. She doesn't remember women not being. And so her response to anybody telling women they can't do that is, why? That's silly. Women can do that's just her natural response to everything.
This is ridiculous.
It's
the notion
ridiculous.
of it is crazy.
She's like, of course I can do this. I can do this.
Yes.
There's nothing about. So I love, and the confidence that she has is really incredible. She has so much more confidence than I had at that age. And, she's 14, and part of me can't help but wonder, I internalized a lot of the purity culture messages. I internalized a lot of this stuff about what women are supposed to do and what women are supposed to be. She hasn't internalized any of that. She doesn't have that. And the difference it has made in her ability to stand up for herself and stand up for her friends is just amazing. And as for my husband, I think, in fact, I'll tell you this, I'll reveal this. I dedicated my next book to my husband. He doesn't know it yet.
Aw. That's
But
great.
the reason, and some people might think it's weird that I'm dedicating a book that's about pastors' wives to my husband. And what I wrote in there, I said, the church would be a much better place if more men were like you. And that's, and it's not that my husband doesn't question things or he's not a doormat by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, both of us are probably what James Dobson would call strong-willed. Both of us together, we're very strong-willed people, but he listens. And his integrity is just unmatched in my experience of pastors. And it's just, I see the difference that makes in pastoral ministry. And then I watch the mega pastors who are complaining. I'm just like, if you were different, the church would be different.
Yeah.
And they need to know that. I think, everybody wants to harp on women be silent, but have they thought about the warnings against people, for teachers, that we are the ones who are held responsible for what we teach?
Right.
And I wish they would.
I even like the idea of noncompliance. Like, even if you can't come against something, if you could just simply not comply with it, we'd be, so much farther ahead. But as you were describing, like your son, and his critique of like a false gospel, very clear now because he knows the true one, and your daughter who's just like rising in confidence, and your husband who's like, I'm sure this family's celebrating who you are and the truth and the power the truth has to set people free. As you're describing that, I'm thinking of the future of the church and the possibilities of a generation set free. And this is the thing that's on offer. This is, I think, what God is trying to do. He's not trying to destroy things. He's trying to liberate a generation from this cycle of harm. And what a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing to have sons who are relieved from the burden of patriarchy and the way that it actually shoves them into caricatures and keeps them stuck in cycles of sin.
Yeah.
So it's so beautiful. Okay, now I don't want to run out of time because I want you to tell us about your new book, because I can't wait. My friend actually has a term. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but I recently heard it and I was like laughing forever. She called it sexually transmitted ministry. STMs.
This is what happens when you let women in and they bring in all these dangerous terms, Danielle.
Yeah, I was like, I'm sorry, what? She goes, she was describing like a church, and she said they say they empower women, but really what they do is sexually transmit ministry. And I said, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
And she said they sexually transmit ministry, which is literally the topic of your book, is this idea that women are leaders, but really they're just married to to the pastor. Exactly. And so by proximity of their sexual relationship with their husband, they get access. And they're not qualified, or they're or even if they are qualified, their only qualification is actually their sexual relationship, which is just bizarre that we got here. Tell us about your book and what you're hoping for it.
You know what? That's actually what my book is about. It's how did we get here where the most significant leadership role, the most visible and most applauded leadership role for women in conservative evangelical spaces is one of marriage to a minister. And this is not a role we find in the Bible. And I just, it's not a role we find in the Bible.
And that there, it just blows my mind as you say this thing that you've elevated and isolated, and it's not in the Bible.
It's not in the Bible.
How do we get here?
And it doesn't mean, and I can say these things because I'm a pastor's wife, and I'm a happy pastor's wife. Like, I don't want to be a pastor, and I love being in ministry, but not actually having to be the one in charge of ministry. I actually like that because that's not my calling. So I can say these things because I'm on the inside. I'm very much on the inside track of this. And so I think I can raise a mirror in ways that maybe other people would not. Although I'm still going to get a huge amount of pushback. I am quite certain for it.
Well, because what you're doing now, this is really interesting because strategically, if you think about patriarchy as a power and an oppression, you took it on front ways. And then what patriarchy does is it like every power does, is it kind of moves sideways. It sidesteps the frontal attack. So then the frontal attack is like, okay, there's still people hanging on to these ridiculous things, which are just lies. And so we can kind of see that now. So it's kind of exposed it. But then there's this like movement to the left, and it shifts, and it's kind of, it's tricky because it's like this sideways. We are empowering, we are giving women platform. We are, but actually when you really look at what's happening is it's actually not real power. They don't have a specific power role or a leadership role in sort of the hierarchy chart. So when you look, they're not really given proper authority or power, but they're given platform. But even their platform is only attached to a man.
Yes.
So it's kind of that, it's that Bechdel test in Hollywood, right? Do you mention that, where it's like you watch a movie and if there's two women and they both have names and they have a conversation with themselves about something besides a man, then that's a test that it's actually maybe a movie that represents women. And there's so few movies that actually meet that criteria. I feel like that's true in ministry and in churches, and this is where you're nailing it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I like that. I hadn't thought about it going sideways. But that's exactly what I've done, is that I've taken the thesis of the making of biblical womanhood, and then I've seen how this actually plays out and impacts leadership within the church. And one of the things that, I don't know if you've seen this turn, I've seen this turn quite a bit with people in complementarian spaces, is that they say all the time, they say, "Oh, I support women in ministry." So, they say all the time. And I'm like, okay, it's time to let's break down what that actually is saying.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by supporting women in ministry? You are supporting women in dependent roles.
You gaslight women. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, that's it. That's what you're supporting. And this is not what we see either in the Bible or in church history, or it's not the only thing we see. That's actually my argument. So I guess I'm trying to drive the argument home more of the making of biblical womanhood. I'm also wanting to show women what happens when we are turned on each other, because one of the things that I have also found is there is a lot of, past, like, in fact, when I first put the book out there, immediately got this not very nice response from this female pastor who was angered by the fact that I was focusing on pastors' wives, and that I had the subtitle of, how marriage replaced ordination as a woman's path to ministry. That's the subtitle of it. And she was angered by that. And I said, "Hey, first of all, I'm not arguing this is the way it should be. I'm telling you, this is what happened. This is what happened. And this is why women who are called to pastoral ministry feel such, I think, tension with pastors' wives, because this narrative has pitted us against each other.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, hey, God calls people to serve in so many different ways, and we are serving alongside our sisters who are preaching. Can you think about how much more powerful the church would be? I mean, one of the things I've seen in this book, researching this book, is how powerful pastors' wives, the amazing things that they have done. And if they were working alongside female pastors, it would change the church.
Yeah, or even if they took the role that is their gift. So I've said this 1,000 times. It's really, for me, it's transparency. So like, if you're called to co-lead the church, then get ordained and co-lead the church. If you're called to pastoral ministry, which, like, so many, I know pastors' wives are the pastors in the couple, then be the pastor. She should be the pastoral ministry director of the church. Or if you're called to the mission side of things, then be the global missions pastor. Right. There's so many ways or if you're called just to assist your husband, then be the personal assistant to your husband. There's no shame in that if that's what you feel called to. So I'm just like, but it's just like the lack of clarity that allows this to slide into something that isn't actually helpful, because it just covers what is actually true, which is a limitation. Yeah. Then the other thing I was thinking about, especially in your tradition, like in that evangelical, like Bible college space of, like, I literally have talked to women, not many, because I don't do much in those spaces. I wonder why.
Well, they don't invite you that often.
I don't know why they don't invite me.
It's really strange.
Right. But
you have your husband's blessing,
to girls, and I'm like, what are you aiming for? Like, they're in Bible college or whatever. And they say out loud, I'm aiming to marry a pastor.
Yes.
And I'll be like, I'm sorry, what? Like, you're aiming to marry a
That's
pastor?
What we're told.
What on earth?
That's
like, so even that, like, that's the highest aim of a girl who's been raised in a culture where you don't have any access to your own leadership.
Exactly.
So your only way in is to marry a pastor. And even that is such a dysfunctional way to even set up a marriage. I mean, it's just, ugh.
It is. It's, So, I mean, that's what my book is about. It tells us how we got here. It follows it from the ancient all the way through the medieval. I love my medieval chapter. I got to spend a little bit more time on medieval history in it, and I'm really really excited about, chapters 3, 4, and 5 are probably my favorite chapters
Yeah.
in the sense of
Great.
the history that I'm telling, because I think it's also the part that people won't know as much.
Does this even dig into like the marriage, like women being given in marriage, like the possessive idea of the
I do
construct,
a little
or
bit. That's its whole
okay,
other thing as well. There
right.
there is an evolution. What's interesting is that marriage being clarified is something that is a much slower process than we like to think about in the Western world. We want to put it all the way
Mhm.
back to Adam and Eve,
Right.
and it's just like, no, what we understand marriages today is not
Mhm. Right.
doesn't apply to that area.
Right.
And you just have to understand that. And I think
Mhm.
so. But what's interesting is that the sacrament of marriage does evolve around the time that we also see the sacrament of ordination evolving, and they evolve much later than we want to think they are. So when people come up to me and say, well, women can do everything but be ordained, or that ordination means serving at the altar, I'm like, wow, why do you think that's what ordination means?
What a modern
Mhm.
concept.
Let's talk about
I'm
that.
kind of actually biblical with how I understand communion, so I don't feel the need for ordination. Actually, that's
It's
a
Right.
just,
very
well,
man-made concept.
that's
Mhm.
actually,
It is.
that is a very fair understanding. I mean, that's
Mhm.
people need to understand that
Mhm.
our authority, the ways that we have built our authority structures within the church, are
Mhm.
based upon our historical context,
Mhm.
and that very little of them come from the Bible itself.
Yeah.
And I think people just need, and that there is a lot of, obviously I believe fully in the Bible. I find it fully trustworthy, but it doesn't tell us the things we think it tells us. And I think we need to embrace that more. We
Mm.
need to be more willing to consider that. And so that's what I'm also trying to get people to see. I will tell you, my final chapter parallels the making of biblical womanhood, although not by intent. Last chapter before the conclusion of the making of biblical womanhood, I pulled it around to abuse and how
Mhm.
complementarianism connects with abuse. And I didn't mean for the pastor's wife book to mimic that structure,
Mhm.
but I found in the SBC archives, I uncovered a clergy abuse case
Mhm.
that led me all the way following it to Canada. And it led me to, in addition to the victims of the sex abuse case, it led me to a pastor's wife who lived
Mhm.
through a husband who committed clergy abuse. And I tell that chapter through her eyes. And it's
Wow.
it's hard for me to make it through that chapter
Wow.
without tearing up. The reality of how this type of life impacts women who
Mhm.
are living in it every
Mhm.
day it's just incredible. And the church needs to hear it. They need to
Mm.
hear it.
I read an article not that long ago on Elizabeth Elliot and her marriages and how deep how dark the journey got in terms of control and levels of like suppression over someone who started so powerfully strong. It's just really fascinating at the
Yes.
harm this does to women.
Her
Wow.
story. And, I think if we really think about it again, bringing it back to recovering biblical manhood and womanhood, they used
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth Elliot in that book
Mm-hmm.
to put
100%.
forward their narrative. And now that we're learning about what her life was like at
Mm-hmm.
that time,
Yeah.
it's just, I mean,
So sad. And that again, that's sort of that power that's at work to not just sidestep or overlook, but to literally push down and destroy and to kill and to steal people's potential and the church's future. And
it's exactly
so
right.
this is what we're all on about. We love what you're doing, Beth Allison
Thank you.
Barr. We're cheering over here. I hope we're cheering publicly. We will. You got anybody that you need somebody to deal with, just call me and give me their address. I'll sort it out. I'm a Canadian. I'll go apologize, of course. But no, we're just with you and for you. And
Thank you.
this Need to Know book and your contribution to it is all part of a a season that we're in of the church where God, I think, is inviting everybody to say, we've all got a part to play in the future, and it's bright. If only we wouldn't be so afraid. So don't be afraid, guys. We need to know some things. And these are some of the things. The name of your book again, where people can get it, when it's coming out, Beth.
So my next book is Becoming the Pastor's Wife, How Marriage Replaced Ordination as a Woman's Path to Ministry. And it is not exactly a sequel to The Making of Biblical Womanhood, but it follows a parallel story. And so shows the impact of the subjugation of women within the lives of women called to ministry, and also women who just get stuck in the path. And it is officially releasing in March, but I have some fun things that will be leading up to it. So the spring's going to be really fun.
And guys, if you want some prep reading while you're getting ready for the March drop, pick up Need to Know. It'll be out in October. And it's 21 different voices like Beth's, experts in their spaces. It's quite a wide topic around not just abuse, but also theology, how we view God, how we practice, how we co-lead, what team looks like, what diversity is, how it's important. It's 21 diverse voices of like, if I could invite you to a table that would change your life, like if I could invite you to dinner with 21 of my most esteemed colleagues in this fight for freedom and the future of the church, I would invite you to this table. And I would just get you to sit at this table and listen to these women and men. It's remarkable. So get that. Need to Know. It's out in October. We'll give you the details. And then let it be a prep for this book coming out in March by Beth. We're excited about the future. Thanks again, Beth. Thanks, James, for being a good man.
Thank you.